Hello and welcome to episode 105 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, an exploration of the costs of nuclear viz solar. Spoiler, solar's cheaper even if Vladimir Putin's army of misfits shells them with his tanks.
Kawasaki has unveiled an all-electric robotic goat. No, that's not an electric motorcycle. That's the greatest of all time. It really is a robotic goat. In their defense, they were really high at the time.
Concentrated solar might be making a comeback, and it could be a boon for those who like their birds extra crispy.
And Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he wants their coal plants to run as long as they possibly can for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. Meanwhile, Australian citizens are hoping for a government that doesn't blow.
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
So I've got an update on, my Tesla safety score. We were talking about this last week.
Quite controversially, yes.
The Tesla full self-driving beta is coming to Canada, so everyone with a Tesla who's paid for the software can get this safety score. So I have an update.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, my score was 98. And this week, drum roll, please.
It's 99.
Thank you. It's 99, yeah.
Yeah, all. I guessed. I knew you weren't going to make the 100. I just knew it.
No, but I had this one incident where I was just driving down kind of a back alley behind the grocery store, and we have a lot of jackrabbits in our city, these nice white rabbits.
Yeah, a lot of them. Could eat them if we need to, and we probably will soon.
And I was driving fairly slowly through this back alley, and one of these jackrabbits darted in front of the car. So I had to slam on the brakes. And sure enough, it registered on my safety score of, hard braking. You're not supposed to do hard braking.
But
so
Elon, he saved a bunny. Come on, man. Give him points for that.
I should get some points for that. I mean, it was unfortunate, but still made it to 99.
Well, since we're talking about him, didn't he do something weird? Because I saw him trending. I actually missed what he said. And I know you're kind of taking a break from the internet, but was it something about Ukraine?
Yeah, he challenged Vladimir Putin to a fight or something.
Okay.
I mean, basically what you did on the podcast last week.
Well, I threatened to kill him. I mean, I promised to kill him. I mean, that's what us great minds do. Us great clean energy minds do. We threaten to kill dictators because we don't know any better. Well, we always joke about how, or at least I do, how big we are in TikTok. And last week, however big we're 3 times bigger this week, thanks to the algorithm liking us more. So thank you, algorithm.
We're basically TikTokers, apparently, that also have a podcast.
Brian, I'm afraid that's kind of technically the situation we're in right now, because one of our videos on ground-mounted solar got 460,000 views. And another one on A&W paper cups, which we haven't talked about on the show, got 115,000 or something all in 1 week, and a whole bunch of other views as well. By the way, these paper cups are coming to A&W in Canada, and they're called the Butterfly Cup. And it's interesting because they don't have any plastic on them. You just fold them over and they don't spill. You can pour out of the spout. You can drink out of the spout. And,
so it's like all in one piece?
It's all in one piece. It's all paper recyclable, supposedly, although I don't know how you recycle coffee-soaked paper, but maybe you wash it.
No, and often those cups have some kind of a wax or a plastic coating.
Well, apparently that's
inside
biodegradable, so it's good to go. It's been around for a few years. It's been developed in Europe, and A&W is trying them out now. So that's something I'll have to try one out. I don't drink A&W coffee, but they're supposed to be upping their coffee game, so we'll have to see how that goes. So, there's something interesting here, a column I read in PV Magazine that argues that, if you charge EVs at work and not at home, you would put daytime solar to work. So there's an interesting policy that I hadn't thought of before of charging, enticing people, and making employers have to provide chargers and maybe helping them with that. And then encouraging people to do their bulk of their charging at work during the day and use up the solar.
Well, it's certainly good for the employee if they get the charging for free, but typically we always hear about we should really be charging our EVs overnight, though, because that's when the grid, is not so taxed.
Right. That's an option, too. But this is a way to use up that excess solar that's probably going to come around that'll have to be stored one way or another. It's just one little piece of a larger puzzle. another thing that I was going to wrap up from last week is that Morgan Stanley has warned that nickel prices, which are surging now, could add $1,000 to electric vehicle costs. But I got kind of depressed about that last week, but you quickly went to Tesla Daily, which is a podcast with a YouTube channel. Yeah. Go figure. Not a TikTok channel with a podcast. And they put your mind at ease pretty quickly.
Yeah, I love the Tesla Daily podcast because it really almost always desensationalizes the news. So it's one of those news sources I'm still kind of happy to watch. I'm still trying to stay away from too much news. But yeah, they had a really good explanation of this, and they took some of their ideas from Bloomberg. So Bloomberg reported on this as well. The idea being that, yes, there's been an enormous spike in nickel prices, but this is on like a commodities exchange, like the London Metals Exchange, and where you trade commodities and futures for items. So, clearly the futures for nickel are going to be super high because of the war in Ukraine, and they make lots of nickel in Russia. But that is not where all of the nickel is traded. So if you're a battery maker and you need nickel, you have long-term supply contracts. You're not
trading. You're not getting tomorrow's nickel on the market, and you're ordering years in advance.
So most of the transactions around nickel don't happen on the London Metal Exchange. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was that there's two classes of nickel, Class 1 and Class 2. Class 1 being the higher grade nickel, which is what you need to make batteries. But apparently Class 2 nickel can be refined and upgraded to Class 1. So Russia, unfortunately, is a big supplier of the Class 1 nickel, which we'll need for batteries. But particularly when the prices start to go up like this, it's fairly easy to refine. Well, I don't know if easy is the right word, but
economical.
The Class 2 nickel can be refined and upgraded to Class 1, and those can go into batteries.
It's a fairly low price, much lower than where we're at now. That's the cutoff. Yeah. It's like a quarter of where it went, and you could start, it's economically viable to just, so that means that the price won't go beyond that, which is like a quarter of what it is. So
yeah, there's sort of a stop in place there. So yeah, so that's the state of nickel. It shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to follow up from last week is you mentioned that between shows that the Straight Pipes did yet another electric car review, a luxury car. Was it a Mercedes?
Yeah, Mercedes EQS. I think that's the one. Yeah,
I think that's the one my friend Marty's buying, and they gave it a pretty rough road there.
There were some things they really liked about it, others not so much. It's got this weird crystal knob in where you control by turning this crystal knob, which is kind of cool looking. Yeah. But through the whole video, it was shining lights in their faces, like the sun was reflecting off this crystal knob and shining these blinkers of lights into their faces, which I thought was kind of funny. So yeah, it was sort of a mixed bag review. Many things they liked about it, other things not so much. It's a very expensive vehicle, over 100,000 Canadian. Yeah. You're getting some of those nice Mercedes luxuries, I guess.
But they ran into charging problems again, and this is an issue that we are exposing here on this show, that chargers are a big issue in EV adoption because they're all freaking broken, like all of them. All of them.
And I know I've seen stories about this too on the Fully Charged channel over in the UK, and those stories were kind of appearing like a year ago, 2 years ago. So this could be part of the normal growing pains process. I mean, I think, they were maybe dealing with this in the UK a couple of years ago, and now the problem is, coming to Canada. So yeah, it's a real problem. These things get broken and they don't get fixed, and there's also just problems using the apps. Like, why can't you just tap to pay with a debit card? Yeah. Like you're buying gas or buying groceries? No, that it's all this complicated process of getting an app often, which, doesn't work.
Because sometimes the machines are physically broken. There's, something on the circuit board that is burned out or just not working. And sometimes, or internal fuse is blown, perhaps, we don't know. And sometimes it's the payment is refused. And sometimes you can phone them and they'll turn it on for you and give you a free thing, but that doesn't always work. And it depends on the charging company. So yeah, it's a problem. I'm getting a charger at the Shell station on North Albert where I live. Actually, really close. Not that it matters, but I thought that was really cool. I went on PlugShare to see what stations were broken in town. I noticed a lot of them are only 50 kilowatts. And that's another thing about me buying a Bolt, perhaps. And we'll see how that goes. But the Bolt only charges at 55. But if a lot of charging stations are less than that, then...
Yeah.
And I see Tesla is adding some chargers on the highway east and west of us. So you'll have, two options on the way to the lake.
Oh, fantastic.
Next winter sometime.
I hadn't heard that. Yeah, great.
But I have this thought, Brian. You remember how Elon is talking about making the Tesla chargers available to everybody? And he is in Europe already. So far, I haven't heard any complaints about that. Any Tesla users saying, well, it's filled up with volts and bolts, and haven't heard anything negative yet. But, the Tesla chargers work by and large. Sometimes they don't, but usually the whole station isn't down like you find in these third-party chargers, right?
Yeah, sometimes there's 1 out of 6 chargers down or something like that. Now, of course, if you don't own a Tesla, you will have to use the Tesla app to charge, so that will make it slightly more complicated. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few problems with that, but...
So a Tesla owner just has to plug in, right? I mean, it'll recognize the VIN of the car electronically and bill it to you.
Yeah, it's got the credit card on file, so
that's the way things should be. It would be easier than gas, right? That's the way it should be. But no, these people, Volkswagen and other people have started charging networks, have really screwed it up. Man, if I was a trillionaire, I would start my own charging network right now. I serve hot dogs.
Yeah. You would think that Volkswagen would have built that into their chargers, since this is the Electrify America, Electrify Canada network. It's basically owned and started by Volkswagen. You think, they would have built that in. Why not?
So Elon we mentioned this a couple of shows ago, was talking to the federal government in the United States asking for financing, help, subsidies for opening up his charging network. And the more I think about it, the more I think that's actually a good idea. I was cold on it at first, and now I think... maybe Tesla should be the ubiquitous, that should be our Kleenex of charging, and everybody uses it.
Well, I think they're going to be. I mean, they have such a head start and clearly an interest in doing it that, it's clearly these other players are going to take, years and years to catch up.
I remember they're manufacturing these supercharging stations, these level 3 supercharging that you use for the highway, in China, mass produced. And they're installing them in slabs before they get to the concrete slabs, before they even get to the work site. So they come already prepared to go in. And apparently 8 days is common. I saw something on the internet and one went up in 8 days, which is really fast. Can't put a gas station up in 8 days.
Yeah, speed is important to all of this. And Tesla's one of the few players that seems to get this. It's a climate emergency. It's not just a problem. It's an emergency. And so the speed of these things is super important, which brings me to my next point. There was a video I saw on the Fully Charged channel, again on YouTube, the UK Clean Energy channel. And it was an interview with a company that's making like heat pumps and heat pump boilers for UK homes. And they talked about speed, and I thought that was really great. Like, it wasn't just that, we've got this business and we're going to do this. They're like, no, we have to do this as fast as possible for the good of everybody. And it also is going to be good for the company. Like, all of this is good for that company. It's good for Tesla. Like, speed is good for business as well. But, this is emergency. So let's do it quickly. But yeah, I just wanted to give an update quickly on electrifying my own house. I'm still trying to get rid of the natural gas furnace in my house. It's a very long-term project. And we own a rental house, a rental property, and it has a gas boiler in it. It heats with radiators from a gas boiler. And I would love to replace that with like a heat pump boiler, but I don't know. I'm having trouble finding if such a thing exists. I know that I've heard about them in Europe and in the UK.
Yeah, I hear them every day talked about.
Yeah, but I don't know. So if any of our listeners know anything about heat pump boilers in North Canada or North America, like, is this a thing that anyone's doing? I would love to hear about this.
I bet they do, Brian. It's ridiculous. I'm getting kind of intimidated by how smart our listeners are when we get mail. These, pretty soon rocket scientists are going to literally be listening to the show, and it's like, I don't know as much as you guys, but thanks for listening. Mostly we just like to have a good time.
It's something I need help with because Googling hasn't exactly helped me so far. And, I just don't want to be that idiot who phones up some heating and cooling company, and they're just going to think I'm an insane person for wanting to get rid of natural gas.
Well, my nephew I talked to at Christmas, he's a HVAC installer in industrial places. Like he does, I think he specializes in ductwork mostly. And he was talking about doing his own furnace. And I somehow got on clean energy and told him that New York has banned natural gas for heat pumps. And I don't think he knew what a heat pump was. He's just a young guy starting out. So none of the other guys know what it is. So this is going to be a big shock for people.
It's like that thing we talked about, a couple of months ago on the podcast when, I started online banking 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And I went into the bank I thought that was all they'd be talking about at the bank was how everything was moving online. And, they had no idea. So we're ahead of the curve here. Our listeners are ahead of the curve. So the last thing about electrifying my house, I spoke to our electricity utility, and I may get a new underground service to the house because I have to upgrade to 200 amps from 100 amps. And it turns out my old mast, I have an above ground service to the house. It might be difficult to upgrade that mast because I have the solar panels that are in the way. But anyway, I found out they can dig a new one underground, and I can start going underground. It'll just cost, $2,300. That's the only problem.
It's not crazy.
No.
No,
and doing it through a mast would cost not that much, but it's not like it would be free to do it the other way.
No, it would still be a chunk of change.
It's a premium over the other way of doing it, but that's probably what I'm going to end up doing.
And you'll have a nicer backyard.
I have a nicer backyard, and then I'll have to get rid of, there's probably a telephone wire and a cable TV wire, too. So,
oh, dear.
My fiber optic internet goes over there.
You'll have to get them to put it, but that won't add too much cost, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know if they can do that at the same time or whatever.
I think they can. You have to just coordinate it, and maybe you could, next time you talk to the power people, ask them about that, because...
Yeah.
It's basically just putting I saw this thing on the internet the other day. I often wondered, well, maybe you could put high voltage lines underground, transmission lines. It turns out you can't. There's this one place in Los Angeles. It's because they have to be spaced out or they'll arc. There's so much voltage that they'll arc, and it's almost impossible to insulate them. In fact, the insulation process requires high-pressured oil to be filled in this pipe. There's one place in Los Angeles where they did it, and has to constantly recirculate so there's no hot spots. And it's just a huge expense and a huge problem for this little high-speed, transmission line underground. So basically as far as I know, unless our listeners correct me, that it's just not doable. But I don't think it is because of just the voltage involved in these things. So scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT as we say they have a solution to dust on solar panels. And there's up to 10 billion gallons of water are consumed every year just to clean solar panels. Did not know that. 10 billion gallons of water, which is precious, goes into washing solar panels. And we only have a fraction of the solar panels that we're going to have in a few years, and 20 years from now beyond that. So it's crazy. So according to the researchers, static electricity can be used to dust off solar panels. So I don't know if it's a Swiffer duster or what it is, but they say this object can go through, and it's a more sustainable solution. And they point out that dust is bad, and an accumulation of just 5 milligrams per centimeter squared corresponds to 50% less in the power output. So we were talking about that last week with the ground-mounted solar. They have a robot that actually goes over it every night. I don't know if we mentioned that on the show last week, but the robot goes over it every night, like a little Roomba over the flat solar panels to take the dust off. Maybe because it needs to.
Wow. Yeah, the static electricity thing you're talking about, it's like some kind of a metal rod on rails that is got a static charge, and it just moves back and forth over the panels and apparently picks up the dust. So this would add cost, of course, to the panels. But yeah, using all that water, that's kind of an insane amount of water that it's just going to get bigger.
I was doing some research on another story on lab-grown meat for this show, which we'll get to later. I was minding my own business, and last night, Colbert talks about something that I didn't know about, and that is lab-grown diamonds. I had no idea that lab-grown diamonds exist.
Meanwhile, you can now buy a diamond ring made from ranch dressing. Here's why. You see, diamonds are just pure carbon, which is what all organic material is made from. So this diamond was created in a lab by heating Hidden Valley Ranch seasoning to 2,500 degrees, then crushing the output beneath 400 tons of pressure, taking 5 months total to create.
You remember the the line from Ferris Bueller? What's his name? Cameron is so uptight that if you stuck a lump of coal up his ass in 5 months, you'd have a diamond. Well, it turns out there's some truth to that. Yeah, so it is completely possible to do this, and they're doing it now, and I didn't know. You know why, Brian? I don't buy diamonds. I'm not a diamond person.
I'm surprised. I would have thought you'd be, loaded with diamonds, but okay.
Well, when we have our first sponsor, I'm getting a gold grill for my teeth. That's the first thing I'm buying. A geologist heated the seasoning to 2,500 degrees Celsius and crushed the resulting graphite under 400 tons of pressure, and 5 months later, you got yourself a diamond. So it created a diamond that was shaped into a brilliant cut 2-carat stone and set in white gold. The ring is engraved with something to do with Hidden Valley Ranch, which I believe is an overrated dressing. And Life Gem creates lab-grown diamonds from hair or the ashes of cremated loved ones. Here are the benefits. Greater purity, Brian. So that's nice. Improved quality. So, yeah, these are the things that are going to, this is the same with meat, lab-grown meat. You're going to have better purity of the meat. You're not going to have E. coli, and you're going to have better quality because you're going to have the best quality that there is replicated, and guaranteed origins and guilt-free consumption. That is to say, blood-free, which is always good when you're buying diamonds, and affordable diamonds in various colors, so they're more affordable ultimately, and environmentally friendly, because you know what? Diamond mining is not easy or cheap or emissions free.
No, and of course, this process does take, quite a lot of energy to make a diamond. But the kicker is it's less energy and effort and, water or whatever. I mean, you got to dig hundreds of feet to get these diamonds. This is a less invasive process that uses less energy.
Now, hopefully they can use clean electricity to get to 2,500 degrees Celsius in the future. Brian, there was an article in Clean Technica a few months ago that I want to revisit. It's an article about Georgia, the state in the United States that is the only place in North America that has new nuclear under construction, because every day in the comments on our TikTok channel, I get people spouting nuclear. And every time I talk to somebody on the street or relatives, they say nuclear, nuclear, nuclear. Which used to be a bad thing, but now they think that's the solution. And
sometimes hydrogen.
And sometimes hydrogen, that's correct. That's a little more complicated for your average person on the street. But I asked them why. And it's, they don't know. That just because nuclear does a lot doesn't have any emissions. Well, so does solar and wind and battery. And the prices of these things are quite remarkably different. Like to look at the price of different forms of energy. Let's go over them quickly. Solar PV rooftop is actually on the higher end of any kind of solar or any kind of energy construction, new energy construction of any kind. It goes from $147 to $221 per energy unit. But nuclear is almost as much. It's around $151 to $196 per megawatt hour. So yeah, those two things are expensive, but the cheapest one is solar, and that's way down at around $28. And guess where it's going? Lower. Where's wind going? Lower. PV is probably going to be half that by the end of the decade, some people are predicting. If not, give it a few extra years, but it is going nowhere but down. Of course, there's the odd year where there's, supply shortages and it goes up a bit or something like that. But in the mid and long term, that baby is going down and nuclear prices are going up. So that is a problem when you're trying to argue for nuclear. And if nuclear was the only way to solve our crisis, I would be completely for it. You know, I wouldn't want one in my backyard, obviously. It scares the daylights out of me, but I would, you know, it's better than losing the planet. However, I don't think it's the best way to go, and I don't think it's necessary.
No, and as we discussed on our year-end show for last year, it's, those prices just don't add up. It's not cheap.
So the levelized cost of electricity is when you factor in how much a kilowatt hour or megawatt hour is going to cost over the lifetime of the plant before it's retired, including all the insurance for the nuclear and the disposal and everything. It all adds up and adds to your price. And the fact that nuclear doesn't go at 100%, sometimes they'll quote you what it's running at 100%, and it's only running at 80% because they only need 80% because renewables are, you know, taking up the slack. That's going to happen more and more, and because renewables are the cheapest form for a grid to buy, they're going to be buying more for renewables. So then the nuclear plant only runs at 50%. And then what happens? The cost from the nuclear goes up even more because it's producing less electricity, right? So it's just crazy how that works. Levelized cost of utility solar is about $35. And the cost of running coal, just running coal right now, is $42 in the States. So people have pointed out there's complexity to this, that, you know, they've got long-term agreements with mines and coal mines and utilities, and it's kind of hard to just say, oh, it's cheaper, let's just cancel it. But this is the operation of a coal mine is $42 compared to $35 to build solar. So what do? You build the solar.
Yeah, and this is, of course, why coal plants have been closing, because it's not economically viable. It just doesn't make sense.
So the nuclear costs to operate are $28 per unit of electricity. Gas is about $24. That's just the cost to operate. So the cost of operating nuclear is now more than the cost of building solar. Let that sink in, you nuclear advocates. And I know there's a million of you, and I respect you, but I'm going to constantly make the case that it's not economically viable.
Yeah, it's just one of those things I think it's going to take people a while to get their heads wrapped around. Like, people just don't seem to. That's, again, people always bring up hydrogen, you know. People just don't seem to understand that it's just simple. Solar, wind, batteries. That's all we need.
Yeah, and by the way, geothermal is $74 on average. But building nuclear can start at $147, and your building solar is $28. So that's not including batteries, right? You need batteries to store that to make it the equivalent of that. But wind is around $40 onshore, and it's a little bit more expensive offshore still. But the offshore is at least more constant.
This is an awful lot of numbers. Can we somehow include a graph on our podcast?
I think no. If somebody could develop an audible graph, that would be wonderful. Something like that. PV Magazine did a piece in August called "You've Got $30 billion to Spend and a Climate Crisis, Nuclear or Solar." And the researchers suggested that we can power 80% of the United States with wind, solar, and 12 hours of energy storage. That's not the same everywhere, but the United States is one case, okay? So being able to replace a nuclear power plant hasn't been financially viable, but it is now. That is starting to change.
Apparently, nuclear power delivers about 20% of electricity in the U.S. and about 50% of all the low-emission electricity. And the U.S. has almost 100 power plants operating at more than 90% of the time. And in Georgia, they've got the Vogtle units 3 and 4. They're the only nuclear generating units currently under construction, and they've announced further delays and price increases. Conservative estimates for the cost suggest that the two 1.1 gigawatt facilities will require at least $30 billion to complete, including $3 billion in finance costs and $27 billion in construction.
The new reactors are adding to two old ones, and they'll add 2.2 gigawatts together. So to match that with solar, this is interesting. So these two nuclear reactors added to this site will put out 2.2 gigawatts, and to match that with solar, it's a lot more than that. It's 10.5 gigawatts of peak panel production. That is 12 noon, the first year of the panels in perfect conditions. That's what they can do. So that is 5 times as much. Now, if you have to factor in winter, which happens in Georgia too, rainy weather, etc., nighttime battery efficiency losses. When you're charging the batteries, you lose, and to charge the battery and decharge the battery, you lose some of that power and efficiency losses. So that would be that solar farm that would replace 2 nuclear reactors would be 7% of all the solar that's in the United States right now, and around 40 gigawatt hours of storage would be needed with some padding included. That's included, so it's a generous estimate. So $8.4 billion for the solar fully installed, and $527 million for the power grid upgrades that you would need to do. $7.8 billion for energy storage fully installed, around $200 a kilowatt. And by the way, people, by the time, if you decide to put up a nuclear plant today, if you take it to your city, your provincial government or whatever, state government, and decide to do it, it's going to be 15 years from now at least before you see power spitting out of that thing. And that installed battery of $200 per kilowatt hour is going to be a fraction of that. My guess is a quarter in 15 years.
So the conclusion being that Georgia could save more than $13 billion by moving away from nuclear, going with solar. And this is very similar to the numbers, again, that we ran on our year-end show. We looked at what had been built in Canada in terms of batteries and solar, compared it to what they're proposing for nuclear. And there's just no comparison. The nuclear just costs way, way more for the same amount of power.
Now, it's a pretty radical idea to replace a nuclear plant with solar and batteries. But that's also not the best way to do it, is it? What you should do, and what we talked about with Tony Seba and Rethink X, is the idea of wind mixed in with that, because wind blows during cloudy days and at night. So you create the right mix for where you are, and it becomes even cheaper, because you need less batteries, less solar panels when you throw up the wind turbines as well. And that's a pretty radical idea, but it's completely legitimate.
No, it's not radical for us. It's not radical for our listeners. But yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things where if you talk to somebody on the street who just doesn't follow this stuff all the time, and I don't know, it just seems like it's too good to be true. Like, no, come on, you can't possibly power the world with solar and wind. Come on, that's a fantasy. That's what it seems like to most people.
Well, and it's just too good to be true, and it's not. It would require an enormous solar farm where some of that energy, by the way, would be wasted because you'd have too much at times, right? So maybe you make hydrogen with that. Maybe you desalinate water on the coast of an ocean. There's things you can do with excess electricity, which is something we expect that we're going to have next decade when there is a lot of solar. In fact, I think in the UK they had excess electricity and they gave it away. They said, go manufacture something.
Yeah, no, and they have had negative prices in the UK on occasion, for sure. So that sort of leads us into our next story about Australia. So we've been talking about the conflict in Ukraine, and this is causing, of course, lots of problems in the world and various energy crunches. But basically what we've discussed before is if you're on the kind of clean energy side of things and you look at this Russian conflict as an opportunity, this is a reason to get off the natural gas that's coming from Russia. This is a reason to go solar, to go clean. Every country could have energy independence by going to solar, wind, and batteries, or other clean technologies. But of course, if you're on the other side of this debate, if you're a politician who has lots of friends in the fossil fuel industry and you think that there's a bit more money to be made before you head into the grave and you don't care about your grandchildren, then it's an opportunity to argue for more fossil fuels. So sadly, that's what Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, is doing. He's suggesting that these coal plants need to keep running, and it's under the guise of energy independence, but it doesn't change the basic facts that sure, there may be a short-term crunch and a short-term need to replace some of this natural gas out of Russia. But, that's got very little to do with the coal plants in Australia. And they need to keep on track and switch to clean energy as soon as possible, in spite of what their prime minister says.
They should be putting solar panels on every building in Germany right now,
immediately.
It's not the cheapest way to do it, but kick it up, get the installation going, get the heat pumps going. Yeah, I don't like the Scott Morrison guy, Brian.
No, he's not great. But there's a follow-up, too, we talked about 3 weeks ago, Bill McKibben, noted environmentalist, suggested, the U.S. should crank up production of heat pumps and send those to Europe. Like, this is the best way to fight Putin, rather than fighting him with bombs, fight him with heat pumps. And the U.S. could use their, whatever they call that, where they can force industry to do something on the means of national security. Anyway, there was an update to that on Electrek that apparently the Biden administration is actually considering that, of using it's like the War Measures Act or something. I forget what it's called, but they do have the power to increase production of something like that if they want to.
That's cool, and I wish they would. It's just the most American voters don't know what a heat pump is, and I'm not really blaming them for that. But
might be a hard sell for them.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about concentrated solar. My brother-in-law happily told me one time that, there was a solar plant near Medicine Hat. It went out of business, went bankrupt. He was, assuming that solar was BS because he's an Albertan. It was a concentrated, it wasn't a PV solar, it was concentrated solar. So there are all these mirrors focus on a water tower with a fluid of some sort in it, and it heats it up to red hot temperatures. And of course, the solar panels got covered in snow, or the mirrors got covered in snow, and you had to clean them, and it was dusty in the summertime. And we're in Canada, so it didn't work, and it lost money, and they shut it down.
Although I'll just add there that it's very, very rare that you hear about a clean energy project not working.
But it's not solar. Solar always works. Like, I drove by the solar farm in question, and that I thought it was, that he thought it was, and it wasn't. It was actually a concentrated solar, not a PV solar. So there's something I noticed, Brian, about these concentrated solar farms. I wondered if they were safe for birds. Turns out they're not. The birds ignite into flames, Brian. As you might expect. That's not ideal. In fact, the bright light of the glow of all these mirrors shining on this tower attract insects, and then the birds go for the insects. And they call them streamers because you can see the smoke streaming going to the ground.
Oh, that's horrible.
That's a horrible way to go. But, it's also very expensive. The upside of concentrated solar is that you heat these fluids and you store them, and they continue to produce steam overnight when the sun isn't shining.
Yeah.
That's
molten salt, I've heard, is one of the things they use. And it's kind of like a battery because you heat up the molten salt and it stays hot for a long time.
But I think actual batteries are going to be better because
that's probably better.
But
better for the birds.
There is a company. Well, I have also seen a different design in Africa. They have these troughs. It's a different design. So you got a pipe that goes through this curved mirror trough, and it moves slightly and it heats the pipe. And I don't think it's less concentrated, and I think the bird could get out of there. I assume if there's any birds in Africa in the desert where they're doing this in the first place, which there may not be. But yeah, that's an interesting design. So maybe that's more doable, and they're coming up with better ways to do this. But there's a California company that is trying to do what the dream is to do with small modular nuclear, and that is to manufacture them in a modular way and distribute them to places like mines and bring down the price, because it's quite expensive to build this stuff. So they're trying to do it in a way that would just output it, and like a Lego set, the modular part can be built for different situations. And if you have a mine that's mining copper for EV batteries, you can be more green, and it's less of an environmental impact. So yeah, they're talking about site-specific tailoring is being one of the biggest costs of these things. So making it modular could drop down the price. It opens up the potential for, putting them in industrial facilities and yeah, that's what they have in mind. So we'll see how that goes. It's not dead yet, but it is not. With the price of PV so low and batteries coming down, it seems like that's the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're now getting boring repeating ourselves, but it's just going to be tough to beat solar, wind, and batteries. Just simple and cheap. Okay, so Electrek reports that Kawasaki, so this is the Japanese motorcycle manufacturer, they've unveiled a prototype electric robotic goat, which I just thought was a very funny story. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because Kawasaki is one of these companies that's really been a laggard in switching over to electric. So they make, gasoline-powered motorcycles, and they have announced some plans to move towards electric motorcycles, but so far it feels a bit like Nissan and Toyota. They're just kind of slow playing it and
I don't get it.
Kind of
what's wrong with these
under
people?
promising and not over delivering. So they do have plans in the works for some electric motorcycles, but in the meantime, they have an electric robotic goat.
An electric robotic goat. I saw this. It's nothing less than disturbing.
Well, and it's like many, it's a prototype. Like, it's not meant to be anything or do anything. They're not going to put an electric robotic goat into production.
But somebody was riding
companies
it.
Are often,
so it's like, I'll take the goat to the store, honey, and I'll be back with some eggs.
Yeah, so this is just part of their R&D, I guess. But, hey, Kawasaki, work on some motorcycles, why don't you?
Yeah, do something useful. We don't need a robotic goat. We need a robotic butler and maid.
Oh, there's an idea. And just one thing to add about my own, just back to myself, and I'm trying to retrofit, my house and possibly this rental house to electric. Like, it would be such a shame to put in another natural gas appliance, particularly in this rental house, like another gas boiler. And then, 20 years from now, it would be replaced. But one thing to take into account is the cost of the carbon tax. So yeah, it is very much more expensive to heat your home with electricity around here where it's so damn cold. But once you start factoring in the increases that are going to come with the carbon tax, it's, by 2030, it'd be, I quickly looked at the numbers for like heating a house around here with an air source heat pump and then electric backup. And to do it right now, it would cost 3 times as much energy, 3 times as much cost to heat the home over a year. But I think by 2030 it would be about the same because of the carbon tax.
That's amazing. And that's what the carbon tax is for, is to change behavior, right?
Yeah. And my problem is I want to change behavior now, but I'm, a little bit too much on the bleeding edge of this.
Yeah. And
I need some help to figure out how to do this and not spend an insane amount of money up front and not an insane amount of money on the month-to-month heating costs. Okay, so another story from Electrek. So there's a Swedish trucking company called Unveiled, and they just had a presentation at South by Southwest. This is the Austin, Texas festival of, music and film, but they also have a kind of a tech component to it. And so they had a presentation when they started talking about essentially a new position in the future for truck drivers. And this is something I've wondered about a lot. So, we talk a lot about robo-taxis coming, and pretty soon autonomous rideshare will be happening. But what about those weird cases where, the car gets stuck somewhere and it doesn't know what to do? Like, the software will get better and better, and there'll be sort of fewer of those incidences. But I have always imagined, well, like with a Tesla, which is always connected to the internet, I can certainly see a future where there's a robot Tesla car somewhere and it gets stuck somewhere, doesn't know what to do. Maybe somebody could remotely drive the vehicle. So this is what Unveiled is starting to work on for their trucks. It's a trucking company. They're working on autonomous trucks. And so they have a new position, which is, they call it a pod operator, where they're training to, basically drive these trucks remotely or, basically supervise them. And it sounds it's like a bit like an air traffic controller type of position where they wouldn't be minute to minute driving the trucks remotely, but somebody is going to maybe need to step in and, fix any problems, or, a truck is stuck somewhere. They can check in and see what's happening to it and plan kind of better routes and stuff. So, I thought it was a great story because that's something I've always wondered about. All these autonomous vehicles, they're not going to work perfectly 100% of the time. And, this is a future position of remotely monitoring and perhaps driving these vehicles.
Speaking of good news, here's some bad news. Rivian's getting a huge, boy, are they having trouble lately. They're getting a backlash for trying to open a factory in Georgia, which a lot of places down south are where auto factories are going. My Nissan Leaf was made in Tennessee. So this is I guess it's too bad, but I don't know what to make of it other than it's partially political and maybe partially legit is my best guess. But plans for electric truck, this is for the New York Times, by the way, plans for an electric truck factory in Georgia have unleashed a flurry of not in my backyard environmental concerns, as well as darker conspiracy theories about George Soros. So whenever George Soros is involved, it's legit. The concerns are legit. So the $5 billion investment in this pathetic state that will invigorate the local economy with 7,500 new green jobs. Come on, Georgia. 7,500 jobs? Who cares if George Soros did order them? They're jobs. And it's in a rural part of the state where you can get people working.
No, and it's not dissimilar from what's been going on in Germany with the Tesla plant. There has been a lot of environmental groups protesting and trying to get that stopped. And of course, there certainly are reasons, going electric for vehicles, it kind of keeps us on the same path that we've been on of, maybe cars are not necessarily the solution to all of our problems. We should be biking. We should be using public transit. So there are legitimate environmental concerns. But, that is probably misguided in Germany. It's probably misguided in Georgia. This is a climate emergency. Let's do whatever we can.
Opponents have been holding rallies, organizing online, dabbling in conspiracy theories, and even threatening local officials. And many worry that the huge facility will change the area's bucolic character, increasing light pollution, startling traffic, and spurring more development. Understandable. But don't you want the factory to make jobs? Maybe you can go somewhere else.
I mean, there's an argument to be made against pretty much everything. So, we should all just go live in the woods, I guess.
So the budget is expected to be approved and construction on the site is going to begin this summer one way or another. And they're going to start producing trucks in 2024. Let's dig briefly into the mailbag. Let's see what we have in here. Okay, we got one letter this week that I want to read you, Brian. It's from Faisal in Vancouver. I just started listening to your podcast and love your content and banter. Thank you. Banter. People like our banter. I feel like we could have bantered more this week. You feel like the banter's down?
Shut up, James.
Okay. As a City of Vancouver employee, I work with clean technology companies that relate to waste to energy products. So if you want to chat more about a podcast segment, I'd be interested. Now, Brian, I get a letter every day. We do. Literally every day from PR companies wanting to get interviews with people. This is not a PR company. This is a person. But yeah, we don't do interviews on the show, do we?
No. And why is that, James?
Because the show's long enough. And, it's possible one day we could maybe have a spin-off interview show or something, or a second show in the feed that says interview : so-and-so. I don't know. But we're kind of, our plate's kind of full. I mean, obviously we'll talk to people someday, perhaps in some way. I don't know.
And there's a tech component to it as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Where we'd have to coordinate all this over the internet, and most people don't have proper microphones. No. And there's nothing I hate more than really bad sounding Zoom interviews.
That's true. And 2 years into the pandemic, that has not improved. I yell at the screen every day on the TV. Come on, people. And there's one guy I saw a couple days ago who did it really well. And it was like the Georgia School for Communication Studies. So, of course, they did it well.
And it's weird because you'll see like a celebrity on, like a talk show or something doing an interview from their home. And you think, my God, man, you're a multimillionaire. You can't pay someone to set up a microphone in your house? Come on.
Yeah, and the laptops are on the ground looking straight up at them. It's just ridiculous.
That's right. Yeah, they don't even go eye level. It's crazy.
Yeah, that makes it challenging. It's not like we live in a big center where we could have people in the studio either. The letter goes on. I'd have to run it by the city management and adhere to our processes, but be happy to chat with you. Also, I work a lot of deconstruction of homes with a goal to upcycle and reduce embodied carbon. So that's the circular economy concept, which is very interesting. One of my sons is a first-year civil engineering student. That's correct. He said he was a civil engineering student way back and would be happy to chat with him. Anyway, I love the show and look forward to your EV-related rants. Cheers. Thank you so much for that letter. And we'll keep you in mind if we ever go to an interview format, Brian.
Yeah, and this embodied carbon thing is a big thing in Vancouver because, of course, they are tearing down everything in Vancouver. Yeah. It's a city of constant rebuilding. So I'm glad that somebody in Vancouver is on that. The Clean Energy Show wants to hear from you. Contact us on Twitter, Clean Energy Pod, by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, by voicemail, speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now it's time for
Food News.
The cellular tuna is coming very soon. Apparently, Finless Foods, one of the leading cellular agriculture companies, is focused on seafood and announced that $34 million to expand its operations in cell-based tuna this year in the United States, and the company has now raised a total of $48 million. Some of the money will be used to finalize construction of a pilot facility where the finless product will be made to produce saleable and cell-cultured bluefin tuna. This is something we talk about on the show. Mostly fake meats replacing meat and how that affects the environment. This is cellular-based, which is thought to be next decade stuff, is coming perhaps to your table sooner than I might have expected, Brian.
Yeah, well, maybe tuna is easier to make because, I don't know, who wants tuna?
I don't like tuna. I'm sorry to people who like tuna. I have no desire for tuna, even fake tuna. So lots and lots, this is the benefits, lots and lots of diesel-fueled boat miles will be saved. And bycatch, so that's when things get picked up that shouldn't be caught and get thrown back in the water. This is mostly sharks, 7 million tons of it will be saved when you are getting real tuna. And there's ghost nets and plastics that get left out there. And of course, the transportation and distribution footprints. And it encourages things like fake diamonds. So. Oh, man. We're so long. I apologize. I don't like to leave things out, Brian, but here we go. Electric says that Tesla is seeing its order rate surging in the United States thanks to gas prices, and according to sources familiar with the matter. Yeah. So what do you think of that?
There's been, 2 more price increases announced from Tesla in the last couple of weeks, and that's definitely a sign that, yes, prices are going up, but I think it's mostly demand. Like, there's just getting crazy orders at Tesla, so they're cranking up
One
the
of
prices.
our listeners, Mike, was gloating that he ordered a Tesla Model X before the price hike. Yeah, if you're rich enough to order a Model X, I don't think the price hike means a lot to you, Mike. That's a lot of money for that car.
But he could probably flip it for a profit.
84% of Florida voters support solar net metering, but DeSantis is going to gut it anyway. So boo Florida and boo DeSantis. Danish wind turbine giant Vestas is to suspend work on 4 projects in Russia. Who knew that Russia was doing anything environmental? That's not on our radar very often. So yeah, the long-range Model Y has jumped 20% from January of last year. That's quite a big hike. And it's not because the costs are going. It's not even the supply shortages. It's because the demand is so crazy that they're trying to cool it off.
Yeah, you don't want your customers having to wait 2 years for your car. So sadly, raising the prices is the best way to cut orders.
In a survey, 90% of daters, I don't know how you survey daters, but 90% of daters said that it's important for their match to care about climate change. That's people who are looking to date other people. Say that the people they date, it's important that they care about climate change. That's those kids, Brian, because old people don't. Well, they do. I've got friends who date who are divorced, but it's kind of sad. I'm not going to think about them too much. But the young people, it's important. Okay, so iNews UK, swapping gas boiler for heat pump and solar panels could cut energy bills by €460. Which an efficient heat source can easily beat gas costs right now. And hopefully those heat pumps will come down. Do you expect them to come down?
Yeah, I think so. And insulation, of course, is the other big part of this. The more we can all insulate, the less energy we need.
Biden has restored California's authority to set tighter auto pollution rules, a major policy move that in his quest to rapidly accelerate sales of electric vehicles and phase out the use of gasoline power. That's something that Trump killed, and it seems to be restored, right? You're happy with that?
Yeah, California was always ahead of the rest of the country in terms of their rules for pollution, and now they're allowed to be ahead.
Here's
again.
something that you were referring to earlier. The LA Times editorial board last week called on the White House to enact the Defense Production Act. That's what it's called.
Yes, that was the name I was trying to
launch
think of.
a swift and massive deployment of heat pumps, air conditioning-like systems that can heat and cool homes and buildings across the U.S. and Europe. China already has 306 gigawatts of solar and 328 gigawatts of wind, more than any other country, which puts it over halfway to meeting its pledge of 1,200 gigawatts by the end of this decade. So that's pretty good, I guess.
That's great.
Tesla Insurance is about to expand in 2 more states, Oregon and Virginia. Chinese EV manufacturer Geely is rolling out swap stations for heavy-duty EVs like cement mixers, the heaviest of heavy, except for mining equipment, housing 3-ton battery packs. So instead of, the EV maker in China is swapping. Maybe that makes sense, because we talked about swapping not really making sense in our minds for cars because it's kind of silly. But maybe for an industrial setting, like maybe trucking too. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really run the numbers. I mean, I'm still surprised that battery swapping is still kind of a thing. But maybe it makes sense for this.
Well, that's our time and then some for this week. Our email, once again, is cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Consider rating and reviewing our show on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll eventually read them here on the show. Thanks so much, and welcome to all our new TikTok listeners. We'll see you again next week.
See you next week.